What if one war could redefine an entire nation? Between 1861 and 1865, the United States was torn apart by a brutal conflict that claimed more than 600,000 lives. Brother fought brother, cities burned, and a divided nation faced its greatest test. This was the American Civil War, the conflict that changed America forever. Before the war, America was divided long before the first shot was fired. The northern states embraced industry and rapid economic growth, while the southern states depended on agriculture and enslaved labor. These two very different societies were on a collision course. At the center of the conflict stood slavery. As America expanded westward, one question dominated politics. Would new states permit slavery or ban it? Every new territory brought fresh arguments, making compromise increasingly difficult. In 1860, Abraham Lincoln won the presidential election. Although he promised not to abolish slavery where it already existed, many Southern leaders feared his administration would stop slavery's expansion. Their response would change history. One by one, Southern states announced they were leaving the Union. They formed the Confederate States of America and elected Jefferson Davis as their president. America was no longer united. On April 12, 1861, Confederate forces fired on Fort Sumter. The Civil War had begun. What many believed would be a short conflict quickly became one of the deadliest wars in American history. The First Battle of Bull Run shattered the illusion of a quick victory. Thousands of inexperienced soldiers clashed in Northern Virginia. Civilians who had gathered to watch the battle fled in panic as Union forces retreated. America realized this war would be long, brutal, and costly. As the conflict spread, millions of Americans were drawn into the war. Farmers became soldiers, factories produced weapons around the clock, and women served as nurses, volunteers, and caretakers. Every family felt the devastating impact of the Civil War. In April 1862, the Battle of Shiloh shocked both sides with its enormous casualties. More than 23,000 soldiers were killed, wounded, or missing in just 2 days. The war had become far bloodier than anyone had imagined. September 17, 1862, became the bloodiest single day in American military history. At Antietam, more than 22,000 soldiers were killed, wounded, or missing. Although the battle ended without a decisive victory, it gave President Abraham Lincoln the opportunity to make one of the most important decisions of his presidency. On January 1, 1863, President Abraham Lincoln issued the Emancipation Proclamation, declaring that enslaved people in Confederate-controlled territory were to be free. The war was now not only about preserving the Union, but also about ending slavery. In July 1863, the Battle of Gettysburg became the turning point of the Civil War. For 3 days, fierce fighting raged across the hills of Pennsylvania. General Robert E. Lee's invasion of the North failed, and the Confederate Army was forced to retreat. From this moment onward, the South would struggle to regain the initiative. In 1864, President Abraham Lincoln appointed General Ulysses S. Grant as commander of all Union armies. Unlike many previous generals, Grant refused to retreat. He believed that constant pressure would eventually exhaust the Confederate Army, no matter the cost. Later that year, General William Tecumseh Sherman launched one of the most controversial campaigns of the Civil War. His army marched from Atlanta to Savannah, destroying railroads, bridges, factories, and supplies along the way. Sherman believed that breaking the South's ability to continue fighting would bring the war to an end. For nearly 10 months, Union and Confederate forces faced each other around Petersburg, Virginia. Soldiers endured hunger, disease, constant artillery fire, and exhausting trench warfare. As supplies ran out, the Confederate defenses began to collapse. On April 9, 1865, General Robert E. Lee surrendered the Army of Northern Virginia to General Ulysses S. Grant at Appomattox Courthouse. After 4 years of unimaginable suffering, the Civil War had finally come to an end. Only 5 days after the war ended, tragedy struck the nation. On April 14, 1865, President Abraham Lincoln was shot while attending a play at Ford's Theater. He died the following morning, leaving a grieving nation to rebuild without the leader who had guided it through its darkest days. The Civil War was over, but America's challenges were far from finished. Millions of formerly enslaved people began new lives in freedom, while the southern states faced the enormous task of rebuilding their communities, economy, and government. The period that followed became known as Reconstruction.